Hello there.
Hey, Senator, how are you?
I'm well. What's up? We got a whole film crew here from Portugal.
Oh my goodness.
How are you? Good to see you, Jan. How are you? Are we good? Are we good?
Great. How you
Yep.
do?
Very good. They're doing this whole project comparing U.S. politics versus Portugal. And it's even
Can
though
we swap them our
president? No,
they
have.
love the guy. You know.
You would love his president. He's like Charlie Baker of Portugal. I mean,
Okay.
everybody loves him.
Yeah.
He's a gentleman.
Reasonable guy.
His name is Marcelo, but they call him. He coined the term called "Ma selfies" because he takes selfies.
Oh, my selfies. I like that. That's
very
good.
good.
That's great.
All right.
It was wonderful to see you.
Very good. We're all good, right?
Yes, Senator.
Nice to meet you.
Well, welcome to the Massachusetts State House. It's a great honor for me every day to come here and work at such a great historic building. This is the oldest public seat of government in the United States of America. It was opened in 1795. One of our famous statues is before us, Captain Hooker. And Captain Hooker was a United States Civil War captain from the North. A member of the Union Army. His responsibility was to go into Confederate prisoner of war camps down south and remove from the camps all the women and children. Leave the men behind as prisoner of wars, but take with him the women and children. And he would be riding back to Union camps, and behind him would be hundreds of women and children. And the soldiers in the Union camps would say, "Here come the hookers." And because of that, the euphemism for prostitute is hookers. So there's a little bit of controversy because of the name, his name, and what it means, but it's part of historical reality.
I began, really at a very young age, I began getting involved in my community, volunteering, with local civic events, with local sports. Then in my mid-20s, after I graduated from college, I was asked by the town moderator to serve on the town's finance committee. That's a committee that is responsible for the budget of the local municipality. I served on that committee for 8 years, and that's really where the public service bug bit me. And in 1996, an opportunity arose. The gentleman that was the state representative for the district in the legislature decided to move on to another position, so that seat opened up, and I threw my hat in the ring, and we were successful.
This is the balcony of the Massachusetts State House, the front of the State House. We overlook this beautiful public park in front of us. It was called the Boston Commons because the same gentleman who donated all this property to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to build a new State House also donated all that property to the city of Boston as common grazing land. It's hard to imagine Boston full of cows and horses and chickens and pigs, but it was in the 18th century. And that was common grazing land. It was also common burial land. So if you passed away and you could not afford to be buried in a private cemetery, you would be buried in the Boston Commons. So it's the Boston Commons because it's common grazing land and common burial land. This property here on Beacon Hill was owned by the same gentleman who was the richest man, I was going to say the richest man in America. There was no America at the time, but the richest man in the colonies, in the British colonies, in what is now known as America. And you might have heard of him. His name was John Hancock.
My Portuguese descent did not encourage me to run, but my family's long-standing contributions to the community. My grandfather, who immigrated from Portugal in 1918, became a citizen of the United States in 1934. And in 1956, over 60 years ago, he was elected in the town of Westport as a highway surveyor, they called, which was responsible for the roads and infrastructure, transportation infrastructure. And from that time, our family, my dad and many of his brothers and sisters were actively involved in public service of one way or another, but giving back to our community. And that always served as an inspiration.
This is the Mary L. Fonseca Elementary School in Fall River, Massachusetts. Mary Fonseca was the very first woman elected to the Massachusetts Senate in 1953, and she happened to be Portuguese. Think about how brave she was. In 1953, this was a Portuguese-American woman and walked into a room full of white men. And she served over 30 years as a state senator. She was very, very famous for a lot of pieces of legislation, primarily around education, that she sponsored and she supported. For instance, in 1958, she was the author of the law, of the bill, that prohibited the termination of female teachers when they became pregnant. So prior to 1958, if a woman teacher became pregnant, they could be terminated from their job.
Americans are discovering Portugal in a big way. Portugal's been so quiet on the American scene. I mean, when people think of Europe, they think, of course, of the UK, Ireland, Italy, France, Spain. Nobody thought of Portugal. People now are thinking of Portugal, not only thinking of Portugal, but it's their number one desired place to visit.
Clara Barton was a nurse in the Civil War, and she founded the American Red Cross. She started the Red Cross, and once again, in the 19th century, it was difficult for a woman to do a powerful, big job like founding the Red Cross, and she did it.
I think the image of Portugal growing up was one of a backwoods country, of a poor country, of a country that was not on the cutting edge of technology or of education or of medicine. And over the last 20 years, that image has drastically changed. I think certainly everyone, you know, it's the place to go. I don't think a day goes by where I or my office gets a call from people, non-Portuguese, that want to travel to Portugal, whether it travel to Lisbon or travel to the Açores, and they know I've been many times, so they come to me for a travel advice, and they come back saying, oh my God, it's a vibrant, modern, wonderful country. What took me so long to go there?
I have a photograph in my office of a guy by the name of George Mendonça, who was the famous kissing sailor. There was a famous photograph in Life magazine at the end of World War II of a sailor kissing a nurse. He was Portuguese. He was Portuguese from my district, George Mendonça. And what people don't know is he was married, and not only was he married, but his wife is in the photograph behind him. But he saw firsthand what nurses went through on the nursing ships, because during the war, as men were injured and wounded, they would try to get them, of course, off the battlefield, get them into hospitals. Oftentimes they were on ships, on hospital ships. And he saw firsthand what the nurses did to save lives of other Americans, that after the war, he just saw this nurse, a US naval woman nurse, and just grabbed her and gave her a big kiss, and it became a world famous picture.
My whole life growing up, I heard a lot about the Luso-Judeo relationships and how many Portuguese have rich Jewish blood in their veins. And about 10 years ago, I got involved in a project in Ponta Delgada, San Miguel, Açores, for the restoration of the oldest post-Inquisition synagogue in Portugal, which is in Ponta Delgada. It was opened in 1834 by Jewish families returning after the Inquisition to Portugal, returning through the Azores from North Africa, from Morocco and North Africa, settled in St. Michael, San Miguel, and they opened the synagogue. The synagogue was abandoned in 1967, and it was left to stay in ruin. So I, along with a number of other both Azorean and Jewish Americans, established the Azorean Jewish Heritage Foundation, and we work collaboratively with the city government and municipal government of Ponta Delgada. And we've restored the synagogue, and it's now just a beautiful museum, cultural center.
So this is my favorite room in the State House. Isn't this beautiful? This is called the Hall of Flags, and or Memorial Hall. And this room is reserved for our veterans, for any events that we have for veterans. And the reason why they call it the Hall of Flags is because in each one of these porticos at one time stood hundreds and hundreds of Massachusetts flags from different communities, from different battle regiments. For instance, in this portico was this one of the first flags representing the United States of America, and it was an honor to serve in the military as a flag bearer. This particular flag went through 4 flag bearers, that the flag bearers continued to get shot and killed. Someone else would pick up the flag and bear it, 4 different ones. And if you look closely, you can still see the blood stains that were on the flag.
In Jerusalem, the Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Museum, which is an extremely powerful museum. There's a lot, it's called the Room of the Righteous, of Gentiles who helped the Jews during World War II. And the first, most predominantly displayed individual is Aristide Sousa Mendes. There's a forest in Israel with 30,000 trees that were planted representing the 30,000 lives that he saved. That's in Israel. Why isn't Portugal?
Of course, we had to have a statue of our first United States president, of the first, the first leader of this country, George Washington. But there was an uproar when they unveiled the statue, because if you look at the statue, he's clad in robes. Remember, we just fought a revolutionary war to get away from a monarch, from a dictator. You know, we are a new republic. We wanted to be something new and different. So it was quite controversial that the sculptor decided to have President Washington clad in robes. They couched it, as politicians did in those days, like we do in these days, that's not robe, that's a blanket. He had a blanket around him, but it was quite controversial.
Even though our president and some members of Congress think it's a good thing that we withdraw from the Paris Accord, we absolutely do not in Massachusetts. Our governor, Charlie Baker, who is a Republican, by the way, pledged, he and 9 other Northeastern governors pledged to remain with the same protocols of the Paris Accord. We in Massachusetts became the first state in the country to go out for a procurement for offshore wind generation. For the next 10 years, there will be over 200 wind turbines installed off our shore. There's an abundance of wind energy, and we will capture that energy, turn it into electricity, and provide clean, renewable electric energy for our citizens and for our businesses.
There's a plan going forward now for these fossil fuels to be replaced with new and renewable. We've got 1,600 megawatts going in right offshore here. That's going to replace the electricity that was supplied by Brayton Point. Right off our shores, largest in the Western Hemisphere, 1,600 megawatts. So think about, the wind turbine that's here at Phillips. It looks big. That's 1.5 megawatts. The turbines that are going to be offshore are 8 megawatts, 5 times bigger than that. And think about all of the equipment and tools and the support mechanisms, the monopoles, the foundations, all the cabling that's going to connect all that. It's going to be a whole new industry that's going to take off here in the South Coast. Not just, all through the Northeast United States, because New York's jumping in, Rhode Island's jumping in, Maryland's jumping in, but we're going to be the first. another very famous painting for a couple reasons, 3 reasons. First of all, it's the only painting in existence of President Abraham Lincoln standing up. President Lincoln was very tall, very gangly, and he was very self-conscious about his height. For his day, he was extremely tall. So that's the only painting of President Lincoln standing. Second thing, if you look at the face, that is the face that's on the $5 bill. If you look at US currency, Lincoln is on the $5 American currency. It's that face, that exact face that they use as that model. And the third thing that makes it interesting is that President Lincoln was very frugal. He did not like to spend money. And when he commissioned this portrait, he has a hand behind his back. Do you know why? Because portrait artists charge by the number of limbs. So if you ever heard the expression, that costs an arm and a leg, that's how it gets through. That's how that expression comes forward. That costs an arm and a leg. So because he had one hand behind his back, it cost him less money to have that portrait commissioned. True story. At least I think it's true.
The mood in America changed so much. This nationalism, this populism that we see happening, once again, all over the world is happening here in the United States also. And they elected, the United States elected Donald Trump to be president.
So if you notice on every desk, it's called the Senate calendar. Those are matters that are before us, and they're on each desk. So every day we have our calendar. So there's an expression in America, cut through the red tape. It means, never mind that red tape, take it off and get down to work. Get it done. Don't talk about it, don't think about it, do it. But it originated here in Massachusetts. Arm and a leg, cut through the red tape. You know, a lot of these euphemisms. Hooker, you know, hookers, you know, a lot of euphemisms.
In many ways, Massachusetts is like an island in the United States that we are very much more progressive, dealing with so many social issues. Not only were we the first state in the country to provide universal health care, we were also the first state in the country to legalize same-sex marriage. We lead the world on transgender issues, lead the country where many of our states, especially states in mid-America, in south part of the United States, are going one direction. Massachusetts is at the forefront of protecting individuals' rights. And we tend not to get caught up in the populist nationalist rhetoric as much as many other parts of the country do. And maybe it's because it's a long-standing history. Maybe because Massachusetts is home to over 50 colleges and universities, some of the best and most important in the world. Our healthcare system, our hospitals are some of the best and most important in the world. And we value those ideals here in Massachusetts. I think it's more European, and some will say that Boston is the most European-like city in America. And I think if you walk around Boston, you'll agree with that.
Our Constitution, the Massachusetts State Constitution, is the oldest Constitution in the world. It predates the US Constitution by about 12 years. The US Constitution was drafted using the Massachusetts Constitution as a model. We are the oldest Constitution in the world. It still works. I'm still amazed by how brilliant our founding fathers were to ensure this series of checks and balances. There's a House and a Senate and the legislature providing checks and balances on one another. There's a chief executive officer, the governor, providing checks and balances on the legislature. We have a process called the referendum process, whereas you can pass laws, you can go directly to the ballot, you can skip the legislature. It's a high standard, it's difficult, but it happens regularly. That's a check and balance on us. So there's a series of what we call checks and balances, ensuring that power does not rest in one hand or in one body, that power is shared. So how are we doing?
I underestimated the populist nationalist feelings of the United States. I could not imagine in my mind that the United States would elect an individual who's criticized everybody, who criticized people like John McCain, who really had racist undertones. It very much surprised me. It very much disappointed me. Believe me, you know, it bothers me that we have an individual who's serving as president who acts like this, who is just not presidential, I mean, but it is what it is. And he is the president, and at least we in the state legislature of Massachusetts, we don't spend a lot of time dwelling on that. We move forward.
Winston Churchill once said that democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others. It's not made to be efficient. It is a deliberative process. Even though majority rules, the majority does not have the right to trample the opinions of the minority. And a good democracy works when the majority listens, not just hears, but really listens to the opinions of the minority. Because that's how you get better pieces of legislation in the end. And we're proud in Massachusetts that we have a legislature that's overwhelmingly controlled by the Democrats. We have a governor who is a Republican, and we get along just fine. We have our differences of opinions. It never gets personal. We put our differences aside and focus on what we agree on. And, you know, there's a reason why Massachusetts is #1 in the United States when it comes to education, #1 in the United States when it comes to health care, and the environment, in gun safety, in public safety.
Castaña's talking about politics in America,
Yeah,
and how it's so much different than politics.
sure it is.
You
But
know,
it's,
you know, the biggest difference is, in America, I choose my party. My party doesn't choose me. And that drives me crazy. Over there,
yeah,
you know, you're on the list as your party chooses you.
yeah,
Whereas over here, I'm chosen by my constituents.
right.
And I choose whether I'm going to be a Democrat or Republican or whatever party I want to be.
In Boston, we have some of the best sports teams in the United States of America. The New England Patriots are the best American football team. The Boston Red Sox, the Boston Bruins, the Boston Celtics. But with me, my passion is my Benfica. And I know not everyone in Portugal agrees with me on that, but that's okay. You know, this year was a tough year. We didn't start out too good. Then we got better, and we were really good for a while. And then at the end, we kind of faltered a little bit. But, you know, we were champions 4 times in a row. We do have to allow other teams to have a nibble at the apple every once in a while. Otherwise, they just get bored, and they know that Benfica is the best. My other favorite team from San Miguel, Santa Clara, made First Division. Because even though my family is from the continent, Lisbon and Beira Alta, most of my constituents that I represent in southeastern Mass are from the Açores. So to see their football team advance to the First Division, I think is tremendous. Let's just hope they can stay there this time. I know they've been there before and they've had a tough time. It's tough to compete with the dollars, but we're excited about that.